Okay, so it's hit 2 o'clock. We've just had lunch. And after this session, Stephanie's going to tell you how to relax. So it's my job to stress you out as much as possible. Okay, as you already know, my name is David Cox, and I'm going to tell you about an application technology that I've written called Sparkler. Okay, so all of you have written, you build an application and you've released version 1, and now you've created version 1.1, version 2, whatever it is, you've created a later version. And the question is, how do you get your users to update or even know about the next version that you have created? And one possibility is to use this technology called Sparkler. So, what does Sparkler do? Sparkler lets your application know very quickly if there is a later version than what they're currently running. It will come up with a window and show you what has changed in the later version. It'll tell you you're running version 1 and version 1.1 is out, and typically it will show you what was in version 1 and what is in version 1.1. So you can decide if the bug fixes or new features are for you or not. It then offers to you the option to download it and install that later version, or you can skip that version. If it does download and install the new version, then the new version will completely remove the old version from your hard drive. Now, there are some people for whom Sparkler is not suitable. It's not suitable for App Store apps, whether they're on Mac OS, iOS, Android OS. The reason is that the App Stores already handle the whole process of you upgrading to later versions. It's not suitable for your applications where there won't be updates. You write an application for a client once, it does what it needs to do, he will never need to need new features, don't bother putting in the pain of an updater. You may also have apps where you run them just on a limited number of servers. You build it, you put it up on 2 servers, and it's only your servers that they're ever going to be running on. If you get a new version, you'll delete it, put the new one up. Don't bother putting an updater in there. If you use the MBS Zojo Updater Kit, there's no point using Sparkler because it does all of that updating for you. Some people write their own homegrown coded versions of updaters, like you might have a script to automatically run to update. Fine, don't bother using Sparkler, continue using your script. And I use Lifeboat for a lot of applications, web-based applications, so there's no point using Sparkler in them because Lifeboat does that work for you. Okay, so looking at the market, where are the gaps? So the 3 different types of technologies we have are app stores and Christian's MBS Updater and Sparkler. When you put something on the App Store, it handles desktop and mobile, but it doesn't handle web apps. The App Store can't take web apps, and typically they don't support Linux as well. If you do install an application on an App Store, usually you only get one choice. Either you can put the Universal version or the Intel version or the ARM version up there, but you only get one choice of those 3. Again, 32-bit, 64-bit. When you put something up on the store, well, Mac OS and iOS is only 64-bit, but other stores, typically you just get to install one version of the applications, whether it's 32-bit or 64-bit, but not both. With the app stores, you don't get the choice of skipping. If you say, automatically update all my apps, boom, it will download automatically for you. The app stores are not based on the Sparkle project technology, but what you do get at the other end is good support at a cost, and the administration is typically through a web application to say what you want to upload your new version. Now, Christian's product is great. It supports desktop, but it doesn't support web apps, doesn't support mobile, and I'm pretty sure it doesn't support Linux, but there may be ways that you can change that. And when I've got this, and when I've used this before, typically you only have one. I can put up a universal version of my new app, or Intel, or ARM, but I can't put all three. I have to choose which one goes up there. Same with 32-bit or 64-bit, but he does provide the capability to skip a version and wait for the next one. Christian's technology is based upon the Sparkle project. He provides excellent support, as we know, but there is a cost. It's not a free plug-in from him. You do actually have to pay for it. And he has his application for managing the updates, the new versions, is a desktop application only. So, when I wrote Sparkler, I wanted to fill in some of these gaps. I still can't do mobile, but that's mainly because the stores do all of that for you. But Sparkler does support updating desktop applications as well as web applications. But of course, you wouldn't want the end user to click yes, update the server. That you would probably put it behind a button only for the administrators. And I've got it to support Linux as well. When we come to the variations here, you are able to create applications that you put on the server for every type of application. You can have a universal build and an Intel build and an ARM build, put them three up there, and whenever the application goes to update, it'll say, your application will say, what am I? Am I a universal application? In which case it'll download the universal version. Am I an Intel version? It'll download the Intel version. Am I an ARM version? It'll download the ARM version. Whether you're on Mac or Windows, it will grab that particular thread. Same with 64, 32-bit. So that's more of an issue for the Windows side. If you have people who can only run 32-bit versions of your apps, they download the 32-bit version, but those who are on the 64-bit will download the 64-bit version of the application. Again, in my one, just like Christian's, you can skip. Now, my technology is not based at all upon the Sparkle project, and while the technology is available to you free of charge, I don't provide any support. If you talk to me on the forum or send me an email, I'll try and respond, but I'm not offering support for it, but also it's at no cost. And the application, the Sparkler administrative program, I have written so that you can run it as a desktop application or a web application or an iOS application. It's entirely up to you, and I'll be showing you that later. Okay, so what does it actually look like from your application's perspective? Your application launches and it checks to see if there's a new version of the application. It does it via a JSON file, which is typically only a few K, sitting on a server. It does a URL connection, brings it down, it parses the JSON to see what version number it is, and it checks that version number with what your application is currently running. If there's no new version, if the version hasn't changed, it just exits and your application launches as normal, and the most your application has ever done is having to download a file of a few K, and nothing is displayed on the screen. If, on the other hand, it does say that there is a new version available, a window will appear showing you typically the benefits of it. It'll tell you what version you're currently running, what the latest version is, and ask you, do you want to install it? Here are all the bug fixes in the latest version. Here are all the new features in the latest version versus the previous one. Okay, and you'll get a choice to skip this version, and so that this particular version you won't be nagged on in future. If you choose to skip it, what behind the scenes it's going to do is it's going to write that version number into a file, append it to a file in your application data directory, so that next time you launch the application, it's not going to go, hey, version 2 is available, do you want to download it? And you go, I just told you last week not to do it. Now that can actually be reversed. So even if you say, I want to skip this version, you can have a menu button somewhere, or a button or a menu that you go check for new version, and you can put in a boolean, a true, to say ignore the skipped. And what it'll do in that case is if it detects you have said skipped, it'll come up and say, hey, you said you wanted to skip this. Do you want me to cancel the skipping? In which case you can cancel it, it'll nag you. Now the only other alternative if you have, you've sent people out version 1.1, they've said skip. If version 1.2 comes out, in other words, a third version, then it will start nagging again. You have to, each version you have to say skip, 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 skip. Otherwise, newer versions, it will nag you again. So you can see down here, you have previously asked to skip this version, would you like it to be shown again? Okay. The other alternative is that you can say remind me later. If you click on the remind me later, it just exits Sparkler, continues on with your application running, but next time you launch the application, it will obviously nag you again. Obviously, the last alternative, which is down the bottom right-hand corner, is that you can choose to you can install and update the application. So that's what you see from your application's perspective. What happens from an administration side? Typically what you do is that you go and build your multiple new applications in Zojo, your Mac, your Windows, your Linux, your Universal, your ARM-based, Intel-based, your 32-bit, your 64, your web versions. You build as many or as few as you would like. You build all of your applications. Then you go off and launch the Sparkler admin program. So there's sort of two technologies involved. One is the Sparkler admin, and then there's the Sparkler code that you put into your application itself. So there's two bits here. We're talking about the administration side here. So you launch the Sparkler admin application, and then you go, you think, is there a new version? Well, apart from the first time you set it up, there's always going to be a previous version. So the majority of the case, yes, there is a previous version. And the reason I mentioned that is that there's an archive button in there. So you can click on the archive button, and what that's going to do is it's going to talk to via FTP, it's going to talk to your host, it's going to download the JSON file from your host and parse it and go, what is the latest version that you currently have on your server? And it's going to go, oh, it's version 1.0. What it's then going to do is if you want, it will create a folder on your server with your application name and 1.0, and it's going to take all the files that you've got in that directory and move them one by one into that archive folder. So now your main directory will be empty other than archive folders. The reason that's useful is what happens if you totally stuff up, you introduce a new version and it's dreadful and you quickly want to reverse what you did. You launch an FTP program take everything back out of your archive folder, drag and drop them back into the main folder, and new users who update get the previous, you can reverse what you've done, in other words. And slowly over time, you still keep all your old versions around on the server. Okay, so once we've done that archiving, we then go into the Sparkler admin application and we update the version number. Version 1.0.0 becomes 1.0.1, something like that. We then have a look at, there's where you have the versions. That's saying what does version 1.0.1 do that 1.0.0 didn't do, or any of the others. And it's an HTML editor, so it's very nice. You can just sort of copy and paste up above and you say, okay, there's this bug fix, there's this new feature. So you're updating the version information so people know what each of the versions do. Then you click, there's a calculate button. So what the calculate or recalculate all button is going to do is it's going to have a look at all of your newly built Zojo applications, and it's going to, typically there'll be zip files or exes or DMGs, and it's going to grab some information, it's going to check that they exist and complain if they don't. It's going to check their file length and keep a record of that. It's going to check their file modified date, so we've got a record of that. And it's going to keep their, do a checksum on the file, so that later on we'll see when they download, it will be able to verify that what it's downloaded from our host is actually the correct information. Okay, so if there are any problems in those areas, you fix the problems, but assuming there are no problems, we can now click on an FTP upload. So built into this Sparkler admin application is the ability to actually take your zips and your exes and send them up to your host via FTP, which just saves you a lot of hassle. You don't need to launch another application. FTP them up. And what it moves up is the new latest copy of your JSON file, which is your preferences file as well as the file that goes on the server, sends that JSON file up so that we know that it's the latest version, and any of your executables that you've changed, it will copy them up into the new directory as well. Okay. So let's have a look at some of the settings within the Sparkler admin application. As you can see, I've got it running as a desktop app. This is the same application running as a web app and also as an iOS app. So the first tab is just general, and that's where we have just things like the application name or its title, a bit of a description. Next one down, we have the URL where this JSON file is kept. So you need to put in there what the URL is, because your application is going to have to find that on your host. That's the file, it's only a few K, and bring that down every time to see if there's a new version. We also keep the publish date just as a record, so if you load this up in future, you can go, when was it that I put version 1 up or version 1.01? You've got a record there as to when this version was last updated, and you can click on the Today button and view it and change it to today's date. And also we have the version number. It needs to be a new version number each time so that the user, when they compare that, can specify, can know that they have to download the new version. Okay, so there's the version number there. So the next tab along, I'm not going to go through every tab, The next one is the versions tab here, and this is where we have the HTML editor. It's a graffiti sweet one, so you can put as much or as little formatting into it as you want. You can see it's just got a bit of bolding in there, but basically you can make it as fancy or as plain as you wish. And it usually you have it so it lists the latest version of your application above the previous versions. If you decide, look, I only want to show the last 3 versions, you can keep it short, or there's nothing wrong, there's no reason why you can't keep every version's definitions up there if you wanted. When it stores this HTML, it does a base 64 of it and stores it into that JSON file. The reason it does that is just in case it creates any fancy characters which JSON may not like, it converts it into base 64, which is no problem inside a JSON file. And as I said before, you can put whatever you want into the formatting there. It's entirely up to you. Okay, the next tabs, which you'll see along here, we have macOS, which means macOS Desktop, macOS Web, Windows Desktop, Windows Web, Linux Desktop, Linux Web. This is where we need to go and put, tell it what applications that we've got, that we've built, that we want it to handle the updating. Now, you don't need to put in every single application. If you don't provide macOS versions, you don't put anything into the macOS. If you don't provide Windows or Linux, just leave them blank. If you only have 64-bit Windows version of application, then on Intel, you've only got one thing to put in. In other words, you can ignore the rest. But if you do want to do more over time, you can make more and more available. Okay, so from the macOS side, on macOS there is no 32-bit applications. Those went a few years ago. So we can do 64-bit universal, we can do 64-bit ARM applications, and 64-bit Intel. And for the same, it's the same whether it's a desktop app or a web app. Those 3 are supported under the macOS and macOS Web tabs. For the Windows side, it's slightly different. For Windows, we have 64-bit Intel available, 64-bit ARM, but we do have 32-bit Intel. So in this case, again, it's the same for a Windows desktop, Windows web app, but you can see the difference here. There's no 32-bit ARM support. If somebody desperately wants it, that's fine. I just don't know of anybody who's running 32-bit ARM for Windows. Linux is the same as Windows. Intel and ARM support 64-bit and 32-bit for Intel. So that's how we support, that's how I've got it to support Linux as well. So you can build as many or as few applications you want. You can build 32-bit and 64-bit versions. You can build Intel, ARM and Universal versions. You can build Mac, Windows, Linux versions. You can build desktop and web versions, and it'll handle all of them. How do you create the applications after you've done the build? Typically on Windows, you have a choice. You would either take your Windows application folder and just zip it, or you can run the inno setup application and create and install it. In other words, an exe. The Sparkler application doesn't care if you drop in on top of it a zip application or an exe application. It'll handle it fine. The way you add it in is either you drop your zip on top or your exe on top of the icons here, or you can click the choose button, in which case it then asks you to navigate to where the zip or the exe are. you manually have to go in here and enter this. That while that's entered automatically based on the path you just chose, you have to specify where the download is going to be on your server. And if you want to test to see that it's right, you can actually test and download the current version on your host just to make sure it's fine. These fields here are handled automatically, so as soon as you go and specify a zip or an exe file, it's automatically going to use Christian's routines to examine the file and get a hash. That will specify the last modified date for that application, so you can come along here and go, when was it that I last updated this? And you can see that's just the number of bytes in the zip or the exe. And even though you've updated it, you can turn off whether it's actually going to upload it or not. That might be useful if you've got users who are on 32-bit versions of your application and you go, we're never going to update them. We're moving ahead with the 64-bit versions of our applications, but I'm never going to update the 32-bit. Keep that unchecked. And so the people on 32-bit just forever keep running their old version. Okay, so that's what Windows typically is. Mac OS, because it creates its own distinct application file, you would typically want to zip it just to make it smaller, or drag it onto some DMG, some disk image file. So up to you as to whichever you want to do, but I usually zip. For Linux, whether it's a desktop or a web application, it's creating a folder. So almost always you'll take that folder and just zip it. Either way, whatever happens, it's a single file that is going to be downloaded each time, and then we have to choose what we want to do with that file. With web applications, it doesn't matter what platform they are. Even on Mac, when you create a web application, it gives you a folder of data. So Mac, Windows, Linux, web apps are all going to need to be zipped. Okay, that's fine from the admin perspective. I've got my app, it's running fine. What do I need to add to my application? You need to add one class, one module, and one window app. Now you go, well, that's fine, David, that's 3, but why have you got 4 up there? Well, the class is the same, the methods module is the same. The last 2, you can see there's WinSparkler for desktop or WinSparkler for web. So obviously, for the desktop application, you drag in the desktop WinSparkler. For the web, you drag in the window for the web version. But essentially, that's all you need to do. Next, there's a constant in there which links to wherever it is you're going to be downloading your application. And the reason why it's basically the base level to where your application is going to be stored on the host. Because usually everything after that is going to be the name of your application type will be appended to that. But having the base constant once tells all of your versions, all your applications, where essentially we're going to be looking for information. Okay, then in your app open event, you need to do a couple of checks. The first check you need to run when you're running your application is, do we have an old version? Are we actually version 2 and is version 1 still on our computer, and get it to remove the old version? Most of the time that you run, there won't be an old version on there because you probably haven't updated. But if there is an old version, it will get rid of the old version for you so they won't fill up your hard drive. Now, my applications, I set them up so that they can run in the App Store or they can run downloaded from my website. So I have a Boolean set saying if it's an App Store app, then don't run the Sparkler technology. So I say, look, if it's not an App Store app, then go and run Sparkler. Run it from that method, and what that is now going to do is to check to see if there is a newer version. So that, as you can see, points to where it checks to see if there's a new version, and that particular 3 lines there, you can put wherever you want it to be. You can put it on to run on startup. You can put it in a menu, check for updates. You can put in a timer if you want it. If you don't want it to run on startup, but maybe after 10 minutes, have a timer run to see if there's a new version. You can have a button on there if you want. And this option here, this particular method, by default, it has a Boolean added to it, which is by default false, which is whether or not to ignore skipped versions. So if you normally in your app open event, you will just say do run Sparkler. But if you have a button that says check for new versions, if you put the word true at the end of that, it will ignore any skipping that you've done and say, hey, it'll come up and say, hey, I know you said to skip, but you've got a newer version. In other words, you've got a choice as to whether you want it to ignore skipping or abide by people skipping. If you do say skip, it stores that version number in a file, just in a normal text file in your application data area for this particular application. And if you say, yes, I do want to install it, it will install based on the currently running apps type. So it will work out, am I a desktop or a web app? That's bleedingly obvious. Am I 32-bit or 64-bit? That's very easy, with the target commands. Am I universal, Intel or ARM is a bit harder to determine, but we've now worked out how that is, and there are the methods in there to determine that. Am I Windows, Mac or Linux? That's very easy to determine. But you can look at the method in there to determine exactly what you are, and then when it brings down the JSON, it's going to look up just its particular application and download that one and that one only. So let's see the flowchart. We've seen the flowchart of how you might operate with the admin application. How does it work from your application's perspective? So your application launches, and then it goes to look and see, is there a later version? It does that by downloading the JSON file and having a look at it, as we've mentioned before. Then it goes, okay, now I know what version is on the server. If there's no new version, exit out. If there is a new version but the person said skip, exit out. If there isn't, do you want me to skip this version or install it? If they do say skip this version, it appends the version number to that skip text file. If they do say no, I do want to install it, then it'll grab from the JSON, it'll find the URL to where the new version is, which is typically in the same folder on your host as where the JSON is, and it will download that zip file, exe file, DMG file down to your computer. Once it's downloaded it, it'll check to see were there any URL connection errors in downloading the file. If there were, it'll display the error and just move on. But if there are no errors, it'll then check the file length. The JSON file tells me it should be this size, but the file I've downloaded might be different, in which case it'll give an error and won't install. It'll then do a checksum. is the checksum of the file down unloaded the same checksum as what I've got in the JSON file? Yes, it is. That's fine. Good. We're ready to install. If we do download it and it passes all of these tests, then it looks to see what's the extension on that file that I've downloaded. If the extension of it is an exe, you go, oh, that must be one of those inno setup exes. Or if it's a DMG, maybe it's a Macintosh digital image, in which case it goes and launches the exe or opens up the DMG and it quits your application so that they can run and do the install without your currently running application getting in the way. In other words, it passes off the installation through to a different application. But if it's not an exe or a DMG, it then unzips your application, because that's the only thing left after exes and DMGs are accounted for. It unzips your application and just checks to make sure that it's okay. It then renames on the Mac, you can rename the actual running application. It just puts the word old at the end. If you're running on Windows, it doesn't change the name of your executable, it changes the name of the folder that your executable is in. Again, putting the word old at the end, and typically that will be in your program files folder, but you can rename the folder of a live application on Windows. So it renames it the currently running applications area. It then moves the new application that it just downloaded into the area where the old one was sitting. It's able to do that obviously because we've renamed the old one. Then it launches that new application and quits the currently running application. Launches the new, quits the old, and then the newly running version of the application, the first thing it does when it launches and launches successfully is it now removes the old version of your application. So all of those steps are happening inside your application within the methods that I've put into Sparkler. Okay. There are some tips you might like to know. Now, you can't have duplicate local app location. So in other words, when you do your Zojo builds, if you go and accidentally drag a Windows version on top of the Mac icon, when you do your recalculate check, it's going to go, hey, I've got two actual physical built applications pointing to the same location. It'll give you an error. That's usually because you've dragged the thing to the wrong place. But you can have two different versions pointing to the same area. So for example, if you did originally provide an ARM version and an Intel version of your application, and this is on a Mac, there's no reason why you can't sort of keep those applications there and instead point the download URL to the universal version. So you could, if you wanted, move people, whatever they're on, onto the universal version of your application. So the original Zojo exe or Zojo app file can't be in two locations, but where they point to, what you download can be the same. So then over time, what that may allow you to do is move people from one platform to another. So there will come a time when Intel on the Mac essentially dies. Just so few people will be running it anymore and so what you can do then is go, look, where people were running the universal version of our app before, or the 32-bit version of our old Mac app before, we can now move them to download the ARM version. Or if you had Windows people who are on 32-bit and you go, oh, there's so few, or there's none of them anymore, we want to move everybody who did download the 32-bit Windows version, we're now moving them all to 64-bit. So you can get people to, they have their own lanes and they stay in their own lanes, but if you want to make them jump to a different lane, it is possible for you to do that by specifying a different download URL. And as I mentioned before, you can get users to cancel a skip if you want to. What future changes? I was thinking of adding the ability to do 32-bit ARM. That's mainly an issue for people who I think are running the Raspberry Pis, but I think a lot of the latest Raspberry Pis are all 64-bit, and so I probably won't bring out a 32-bit ARM version of Linux. Also, the FTP side of things, you can do an archive and you can do an upload. Potentially, I could allow the ability to actually download the files from the server, or even once you've got 10 or 15 or 20 old archive versions, maybe it might be nice to see them and go, okay, we're never going to go back to that old version, delete those old archives if we need. That's a possibility, or you can just run an FTP program and go delete manually yourself. Okay, now, it can be a pain if you do it a lot to build all of the applications. If you're just building for one platform, you're doing Windows 64-bit for Intel, it's not an issue. But if you are an idiot like me and you want to go and create multiple strands, multiple types for multiple platforms, I have a Zojo script where you can put in the particular name of your application and where we're going, and it'll have a loop going around for each of the applications, and you can specify, yes, build a Mac version, a web version, a 32-bit, a 64-bit, a universal ARM, whatever it is. The script is a lot longer than that page, so I've got a script which will be provided to you, which can do a lot of that. You can tailor it to your particular needs. In my case, in my testing, I have been able to create, for each single application, I can create 21 different application types. Again, please just feel sorry for me. Okay, I do have a demo, but please, if there are any questions you might have before I show the demo, please ask them now. Yes?
You talked about when, for example, version 1.2 is totally screwed, you want to go back to 1.1, you put back the archive. But people that already have downloaded 1.2, and is that automatically given a pop-up saying that they have to downgrade?
Okay, so the question is, we've got version 1 on the server, and then we archive that into its own separate folder. Then we put 2 up, and then we find out that there's major problems with version 2, and we want to go back to 1. What happens to those people who have downloaded version 2? How do they get back? There's no automatic way of doing it, because it checks all you have to have a 3-digit version number, and it won't let you put in in other words, it must be 1.0.11, or 2.00, whatever, and it checks numerically to see each one has to be later, so it's not alphabetical. So they would be stuck with version 2. Because we are sending the applications to a common folder, you can provide people with that particular link, that hard-coded link. The link to the archive folder will be a subdirectory, but whenever you upload the application to the main directory, it's going to have exactly the same name there, whether it's version 1, whether it's version 2, version 3. So if people have a problem with version 2, you can go to your website and click on where it says download the latest version, and it's going to download version 1. And I've found with Inno setup, with zips and all that sort of stuff, when you run it, it'll just overwrite whatever the later version might be there. But there is no automatic means of reversing it. Yes?
Why not add in the JSON and say that this is version 3 after you retrieve from archive? Go and patch the JSON file so even people who upgraded to 2 are now.
That would be a good way of doing it. So you bring out version 1, it's okay. You bring out version 2, it's problematic. So very quickly, you write and fix version 3, put archive 2, put 3 up there, and even the people who downloaded 2 get to go to version 3. That would be a viable.
No, I mean, when you restore version 1
yes?
in the directory, go to JSON file, patch JSON file to be, so that this is version 3. So even people who got the version 2, their updater is going to download version 1, which is now version 3.
That would work in one way. You're right, in that it would fool your application to go, oh, version 3 is available, and it would download version 1 and replace it, version 2 with version 1. But it might confuse users when they've said download version 2, then download version 3, but when they look at about, it's going to say you've got version 1.
And the system will look for a new version.
So,
We'll start a loop.
It's a loop.
well, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
can you go on your admin panel, only generate the JSON, go quickly type the JSON for version 3, upload the JSON without having to build for 21 minutes all the versions and re-upload stuff. It sounds like you want to.
Yes.
If you're doing this, something went horribly wrong,
Yes.
right? Hopefully, it's one person who you say, try it again in half an hour. It's going to be there.
I would say the easiest way is to remove all the applications from the main upload area. If your program launches and it goes to download the JSON file and the JSON file is missing, it will just skip. It'll just keep going, and your program will be none the wiser. It'll just run with whatever version it is. And then you quickly try and make version 3 and make sure it works properly, then put version 3 up. Yes?
You need admin privileges for the installation, especially in the zip case on Windows.
Where you need admin capability on Windows, usually Inno Setup, your exe, will handle that capability. Also, with Windows, when you build your normal Windows exe application, you can specify what privileges that application needs, and you can say basic user or. But you're right in that if your program is downloading a file, which should be fine, any user can do that, unzipping a file, which any user can do that. If you then go and rename the folder in your applications directory, that could potentially be a violation depending on your user access, and then sort of copying in another application folder and then deleting the original could be a privileges violation on Windows. So if that were the case, what I would do is don't do zip, create an Inno setup.
Well, Inno setup does need privileges in our setting.
So okay.
So the zip file, usually the application is in an area where you don't need admin rights.
Yeah.
So if you decrypt or dzip in that area, there shouldn't be a problem.
So the Sparkler application looks to see where it is the current application is running and will install into that same location. If that location you do have access rights to, then great. So in other words, it could be on drive C or D or E, entirely up to you.
Okay.
Yes? No? Yeah, another one?
So just for the new version info, is it all in one JSON file, or is the option for the updated to just collect all the additions, fixes for all the versions that were skipped?
I will show you in the demo what the JSON file looks like. It looks like a mess, but it is plain text. And as JSON, it has in quotes what the field name is in a sense, and then in quotes what the actual value is. Yes?
It's not really related to your tool, but you said that Windows, the 32 bits should only be used when you must use it. Why? Are there any caveats using
No.
32 bits?
In fact, for
Or
decades,
it's faster?
I have asked people, do you want to have the 32-bit version of Windows running, the application, or 64-bit? And they look at me blankly, because everybody just, developers only build the 32-bit version, and that's what they give them, and it runs on 32-bit or 64-bit. We're now getting to the stage where I think a few years ago it was about 80% of users were running 64-bit Windows. It's probably 90% nowadays. So I think if you wanted to make your life easier, you could just build your application as 64-bit and just ignore 32-bit. There are only a few areas that I found with Windows applications that 32 or 64-bit makes a difference. Usually with things like when I'm zipping a file, how many files can I put in that zip file? Because 32-bit only lets me store up to 4 gigabytes of data in there, but 64 is lots more.
Yeah, but the 32-bit version are only a few files, and the 64-bit version are a bunch of.
So this would allow you to create and install 32-bit and you ignore 64-bit. Or you can, and it'll look at not the version of your Windows, but the version of your application and go, this is a 32-bit application, so I'm going to download the 32-bit, and you don't even provide a 64-bit version. Or you can go 64 only, or 32 and 64, it's up to you, or even move people from one to another.
Okay.
Any more questions before I? Okay, so this is what the application looks like on the desktop. This is what it looks like on the web. This is what it looks like on mobile. And it looks exactly the same between each of them. So this desktop one I haven't loaded in the JSON yet. So when you first launch it, all the fields are blank. And we have a button down here called to load the JSON. If you want to see what the JSON looks like, that's what it looks like. So you can see, even though it's quite complex, you've got these curly brackets with everything in quotes. You've got a quote as to what the variable is, the app description, a colon, and then the next set of quotes describing that what's the name of this sample application I just happen to call Firework, just because it's sort of related to Sparkler. So that's the description, and you can see we've got the HTML here. So that's the variable name, and then this is the HTML converted to base64. So that looks horrible, but it's just taking the HTML and doing a base64 so that I know it's not going to, no curly brackets in it or anything are going to muck up JSON. Everything else is fairly simple. It's just the name of, the application for Linux, for ARM, 64-bit desktop version, and it's a zip and that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's what the zip file looks like, plain text. There's no reason why you couldn't edit it if you want to, but it's just going to be hard work to edit it. So what we would typically do is come down here and go load the JSON. There's the JSON file that I was just looking at there. When I go import it, boom, there's all the details. That's the FTP side of things. Here's what the application details there. So typically we would want to come along and change the version number, we would come along to the HTML, we'd copy and paste that and put version 1.0.3 and whatever new features you put in there. And this is the HTML behind here. If I click on this button, it'll show you what the HTML is behind the scenes. It's going to take that, turn it into base 64, and use that for user setup. And then for each of these, we've got the Mac OS desktop, Universal ARM Intel, and a web version of each, Universal ARM Intel. And you can decide to check or not whether it actually is going to upload each one. And you can see the other buttons that I was showing you there. If you want, you can click on the test button and just verify, and it'll download the latest version you've got on the server. If behind the scenes you built an application, you've zipped it and you put it in the right place, this doesn't automatically update. So just click on the recalculate button and it'll recheck the hash, it'll recheck the last modified date, it'll recheck the length and turn on upload for you. If after a while you go, look, we're not going to be supporting Universal anymore, you come along here, click clear, it's now all gone. So we have now moved, if by this stage you've moved all your Universal Mac app people onto the ARM version, we can get rid of both the Universal and the Intel version and only support the ARM version if we wanted to. Down the end here we have two more tabs. One is for zipping, the other one is for FTP. Zipping a single file is not a problem. Zipping lots can be a pain. So when you build your application and you've got your folder, it's so easy to just drag the folder on top of this icon and boom, it'll create a zip. You can even save the hassle by getting it to delete the original if you wanted, just to save you having to delete them later. You can specify, this is using the Zojo form of zipping. You can specify, okay, best, fastest, normal, or none. By default, I think that you might as well just use best. Instead of dragging, dropping the file or folder onto here, you could click choose file, choose folder, and navigate to it. This now reverses, so this, you drag the zip file on there or choose a file and it will unzip that into whatever the contents is. Again, you can come down here and say, when I unzip it, delete the original. Now, what I found, it may well have been fixed up now, I haven't tested it, but when I was building Mac OS applications, there were some aliases inside the framework folder that when I used the Zojo compression, it was resolving those aliases in the zip file. When I did my testing, when I zipped the same thing inside the macOS operating system and then unzipped, the aliases were fine. And apparently, behind the scenes, Apple uses the ditto command to do its compression. So I've got the option where you can click on this and use a shell command using the ditto command to go off and do the compression of your file or folder, and that will keep the aliases intact. But whether you use this or not is entirely up to you. The other issue I had was that I was building my applications into a folder that had the full description. This is the name of the application, Intel 32-bit desktop, whatever. And so I wanted the ability very easily to say, when you zip this, don't zip it with the name of the actual, the file that I'm dropping in there, because I need them all to be different names. The content is fine, but instead the name that it gives it at the other end will be its parents folder, which is the one that's unique. Anyway, that's what I kept around for zipping to make my life easier and save a bit of admin. Here's the FTP side. So down here, we can test to verify, okay, am I connecting to the FTP server all right? I can click on that and there you go. Yes, I am able to connect to the FTP. and it lists. There's the JSON file and all of the other versions I've got sitting on the server, so I can verify, yes, everything is all up there and is all okay. There's the archive button. I'm not going to run it now, but basically that will move everything into a subfolder. And if I want to upload any of those, Mac, Windows, Linux, desktop or web, any one that is checked, it'll go through and upload them one after the other. So it just takes so much pain away from you by automating all of that. That's the end of the demo. Am I supposed to finish at 3 o'clock? If I have, I'm right on the dot. Any more questions? Okay, thank you.